Mike, today we're talking about co-created episode number 38, Mind Mission, Military Families and Mental Health with Laryssa Lamrock. It was released in May of 2025. What resonated for you in that conversation?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. I've known Laryssa for a while. She made a digital story with me, I think maybe 4 years ago now. She was part of the first group of veterans and families that I worked with. And so listening just sort of brought me back to that first workshop. And I realized how little I actually knew about the military and military culture and just the ways in which, civilians just don't often understand like what people experience when they're in the military and in combat roles and things like that, but also then how that trickles down to their friends and family as well, right? And Laryssa's story is all about being a caregiver. And so that, I was just taken back to those workshops and those stories, and I've really loved working with veterans and families over the years. But one thing that really stood out to me as she was talking about it is when she shared the story, and also through the process of creating her story, how she really experienced this feeling of validation.
Mm-hmm.
She was in a workshop with other veterans, and as they saw her story, they were able to validate her experiences and say, yeah, that matters, right? And I think as caregivers, as supporters of military veterans, especially those with PTSD, there's not that awareness of the people in the military themselves, the impact on families. And so her receiving that validation from military veterans to say, no, your story matters, was a huge part of her experience. And I love that about the digital storytelling process, right? You sometimes get sort of diverse voices in a room, and all you're doing is talking about the important moments of your life. And it's amazing how validated you can feel in your experience by people who have completely different
Mm-hmm.
experiences than you, right? And digital storytelling, I always come into contact with so many people that I probably would never come into contact with in my everyday life. I just finished a workshop with people who have been incarcerated, people experiencing homelessness. These are the types of people that I would not come across in my daily life. But when I'm put in a room and we listen to stories together, and you can see yourself in those experiences, right?
Yeah.
And it just validates their experience and also your own, to recognize that yeah, there are commonalities. You can find commonalities with pretty much anyone. And I love that Laryssa had that experience in her workshop. She found these deep commonalities with some of the veterans that she was in the workshop with. So yeah.
No, that's incredible. And I think I also find it's a gift to get to hear these conversations. So you weren't part of that podcast. I did it with Laryssa, and then you got to
Mm-hmm.
listen to it later and to hear. I think as a facilitator and someone who works in stories with people, you don't always hear all these things that they reflect on later or come back to. And
Yeah.
so I
Mm-hmm.
actually find getting to have these conversations maybe even years later with people around what their story meant to create, what it meant to share, how that experience has touched them
Mm-hmm.
is a pretty incredible thing on its own. So,
Yeah, and she's done a lot with her story, right? She's
she
sharing
really
it in all
has.
her presentations. She said, and she always get this really great conversation going whenever she shares it. So yeah, it's exciting to hear, how, and especially at Atlas, how they're utilizing digital stories. I think is pretty innovative. So yeah, it's cool to get to hear that.
Well, and even the full circle piece about she was at the Story Slam with us the Story Festival in Greece.
Yeah.
And that's when I got to meet Laryssa for the first time. And so,
Hmm.
again, similar to your experience, I didn't have a lot of background with military and veterans and understanding those stories. And this has opened up that world to me a bit as well. So, I don't know, pretty
Cool.
awesome. We are
Yeah.
talking about episode 38, Mind Mission, Military Families and Mental Health with Laryssa Lamrock. They also have a podcast where they go further into stories around the Atlas Veterans Institute. You can listen to the podcast and find all the links to the stories in the show notes below.